The morning mist clung to the shattered towers of their Sara, like forgotten dreams refusing to fade. Jackson pressed his back against the cold stone wall, listening to the distant hum of cleanup drones clearing debris from the latest skirmish. 3 months had passed since the ceasefire, but the planet still bled memories of war. He adjusted his rifle strap and checked his watch. Another patrol, another day of pretending the peace would last. That was when he first saw her. She moved through, the ruins like water finding its way through cracks in stone. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent quality that marked her as Valorian, one of the few remaining from the distant moons. But everything else about her deified explanation. Where other Valorians wore the traditional silver robes of their people, she draped herself in flowing fabrics that seemed to shift color with each step. Tiny bells hung from her hair, creating a gentle music that somehow made the harsh landscape feel less broken. Jackson watched from his hiding spot as she knelt beside a wounded scavenger bird, its wing twisted at an impossible angle. The creature should have been dead, but she cradled it against her chest and began to hum. The sound was unlike anything in his military training, a melody that seemed to reach into the very bones of the earth. As she hummed, the bird's wing began to straighten, its breathing became steady, and within minutes it took flight. "Impossible," Jackson whispered, forgetting his concealment. She turned toward his voice, her eyes the color of deep ocean storms. When she smiled, it was not the cautious expression of someone caught doing something forbidden, but the genuine warmth of someone who had been expecting him. "You have been watching the ruins for 17 days, she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people, but softened by something uniquely her own. "I wondered when you would speak." Jackson stepped from behind the rubble, his weapon lowered but ready. "You knew I was here. The stones whispered of your presence. They remember every footstep, every heartbeat." She stood gracefully, the injured bird now perched contentedly on her shoulder. "I am Celeste of the Whispering Moons, though most simply call me the Wanderer. Jackson Mitchell, 3rd Battalion Reconnaissance." He studied her face, searching for signs of deception or threat. "That healing technique, I've never seen anything like it." Celeste tilted her head, the bells in her hair chiming softly. "Your people have forgotten how to listen to the songs that connect all living things. They focus on taking life rather than nurturing it." "My people are trying to survive," Jackson replied, though without the usual defensive edge that crept into his voice during such conversations. Something about her presence made arguing feel unnecessary. She began walking toward the heart of the ruins, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Survival and living are different things, Jackson Mitchell of the 3rd Battalion. Would you like to see the difference?" Against every protocol he had learned, Jackson found himself following. The bird on her shoulder regarded him with intelligent eyes, as if it too was part of some larger conversation he couldn't quite understand. They walked in comfortable silence through streets that had once bustled with alien merchants and human colonists, now empty except for the occasional scurrying of small creatures reclaiming their territory. "Tell me about the healing," Jackson said as they paused beside a fountain that still somehow flowed with clear water despite the destruction around it. Celeste cupped the water in her hands, watching it trickle between her fingers. "It is not healing in the way your medics understand. I simply remind wounded things of what they were before they were hurt. The memory is always there, waiting to be awakened. That's not how biology works. Your biology, perhaps." She looked at him with those storm-colored eyes. "But life is more than chemistry and physics. It is connection, resonance, the invisible threads that bind all consciousness together. Jackson sat on the fountain's edge, his military training warring with genuine curiosity. The other soldiers talk about you. They say you appear in battle zones, tending to the wounded regardless of which side they fight for. War makes orphans. Of us all, Celeste replied. Pain recognizes no uniform, no species, no cause. When someone cries out in agony, do you hear human or alien, or do you simply hear suffering? The question hung between them like a challenge. Jackson thought of the wounded enemy soldiers he had passed during combat, their faces twisted in the same expressions of fear and pain he had seen on his own comrades. He had never allowed himself to dwell on such thoughts, but now they rose to the surface with uncomfortable clarity. You make it sound simple, he said. Simple and easy are different things. Celeste stood and began walking again, leading him deeper into the ruins. Simple truths are often the most difficult to accept because they require us to abandon the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. They emerged into a clearing where the remnants of an ancient temple stood against the sky. The structure was clearly pre-war, its crystalline walls still humming with some inner energy that made the air shimmer. Celeste placed her palm against the nearest wall, and the entire building began to glow softly. This is where I learned to listen, she said, where my grandmother taught me that healing begins with remembering what we truly are beneath all. The armor we wear. Jackson felt drawn to touch the wall himself. The moment his fingers made contact, a flood of sensations washed over him. He saw the temple as it had been centuries ago, filled with beings from dozens of species learning together, sharing knowledge, celebrating the connections that bound all life. The vision was so vivid, so real, that tears began to flow down his cheeks. What did you do to me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I showed you the memory held in the stones, Celeste replied gently. This is what your people and mine were building together before fear divided us. This is what we could build again. As the vision faded, Jackson found himself changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. The woman beside him was no longer simply an alien curiosity or a potential threat. She was a doorway to something he had lost without realizing it, a connection to the deeper currents of existence that his years of warfare had nearly severed. Why show me this? He asked. Celeste smiled, and in that smile was infinite patience and hope, because you are ready to remember who you were before the war taught you to forget, and because the healing of worlds begins with the healing of individual souls. The sun was setting, painting the crystalline temple in shades of gold and crimson. As they stood together in the gathering dusk, Jackson felt something stirring within him that had nothing to do with military objectives or survival instincts. It was recognition, pure and simple. He was looking at someone who saw through all his armor to the man he had been before the universe taught him to be afraid. Will you teach me? He asked. I will remind you, Celeste replied. The wisdom is already within you, waiting to be awakened. And in that moment, as the first stars appeared in the alien sky, Jackson Mitchell began to understand that love was not just an emotion between two beings, but a force that could transform entire worlds. The days that followed their first meeting blurred together like watercolors bleeding into one another. Jackson found himself abandoning his regular patrol routes, drawn instead to the places where Celeste appeared like morning mist, unpredictable and ethereal. She never stayed in one location long, but somehow he always knew where to find her, as if the ruins themselves were whispering directions to his heart. He discovered her in the old medical district, kneeling beside a group of refugee children who had been separated from their families during the latest evacuation. The children were a mix of species, their large eyes reflecting the trauma of displacement and loss. Celeste had arranged them in a circle around her, their small hands touching hers as she spoke in a voice so gentle it seemed to float on the air itself. "Close your eyes and remember the feeling of safety," she was saying. "Not the memory of a place, but the feeling itself. It lives inside you, waiting to be found again." Jackson watched from a distance as the children's faces gradually softened, their breathing becoming deeper and more relaxed. One small Valorian girl began to smile, her bioluminescent markings glowing faintly with contentment. A human boy who had been clutching a broken toy soldier finally released his grip, his fists unclenching for the first time in weeks. "You have a gift," Jackson said when the children had wandered off to play among the safer ruins. Celeste looked up at him, her storm-colored eyes reflecting something that might have been sadness. "It is not a gift when it comes from necessity. I learned to heal trauma because I carried so much of it myself." She stood and began walking toward what had once been a hospital, its walls now covered in flowering vines that seemed to grow more lush wherever she passed. Jackson fell into step beside her, noting how her presence seemed to calm even the ambient sounds of the ruined city. "Tell me about your trauma," he said, then immediately regretted the directness of the question. But Celeste didn't seem offended. Instead, she paused beside a section of wall where medical equipment lay scattered and broken. "I was not always the wanderer you see now. Once, I was to be the high healer of my people, trained in the ancient arts of consciousness repair. But when the war came, I refused to use my abilities to enhance weapons or create stronger soldiers." She knelt and began gathering the scattered medical supplies, her movements precise and reverent. "My own people cast me out. They said I was too weak, too emotional, too connected to other species to be trusted with Valorian lives. They called me eccentric, unstable, a dreamer who would rather tend to enemy wounded than protect her own kind." Jackson helped her collect the supplies, his hands brushing hers as they worked. Each contact sent small electric shocks through his nervous system, not painful but intensely alive. "What did you do?" "I left," she said simply. "I became exactly what they accused me of being. I wandered between worlds, tending to anyone who needed healing, regardless of species or allegiance. I learned that trauma is the same everywhere, that pain speaks a universal language." They had filled several containers with salvageable medical equipment. Celeste stood and began walking again, leading him toward the old emergency wing. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not just being separated from my people, but from the connection I had always felt to the larger web of consciousness. When you are rejected by your own kind, you begin to doubt whether you belong anywhere at all. Jackson felt a recognition so sharp it was almost painful. "I know that feeling, do you?" She turned to look at him, and he saw that her eyes held depths he was only beginning to understand. "After my first combat deployment, I came home changed. My family, my friends, they all tried to understand, but the things I had seen, the things I had done, they created a barrier I couldn't cross. I was surrounded by people who loved me, but I felt completely alone." Celeste stopped walking and faced him fully. "Show me," she said. "What?" "Show me the memory. Let me see what you carry." Jackson instinctively stepped back. "I can't. It's too much. Too much for you to carry alone, perhaps. But not too much for us to carry together." She extended her hand, palm up. "Trust me, against every instinct, Jackson placed his hand in hers. The moment their skin touched, the world around them shifted. He was back in the burning village, where his unit had been ambushed, watching his closest friend die in his arms. But this time, instead of the crushing weight of guilt and helplessness, he felt something else. Celeste was there with him in the memory. Her presence a warm light that didn't diminish the tragedy but somehow made it bearable. "You blamed yourself," she said softly, not releasing his hand. "I was supposed to protect him. You were supposed to be human. Humans are not gods, Jackson. They cannot control the universe, only respond to it with whatever wisdom and courage they possess in each moment." The memory began to fade, but the relief remained. For the first time in years, Jackson felt the crushing weight of survivor's guilt begin to lift. "How did you do that?" "I reminded you that you are not alone in your pain. When trauma is shared, it becomes bearable. When it is witnessed with compassion, it begins to heal." They had reached the emergency wing, where Celeste began setting up a makeshift healing station with the supplies they had gathered. Her movements were efficient and practiced, but there was something almost ritualistic about the way she arranged each item. "Is this what you do?" Jackson asked. "Travel from place to place, healing the wounded?" "I follow the currents of need," she replied. "Consciousness calls to consciousness across vast distances. When someone is suffering enough, their pain creates ripples that sensitive beings can feel. I simply follow those ripples to their source." As if summoned by her words, a group of injured soldiers began to arrive. They were from different units, different species, but all bore the same expression of desperate hope mixed with skepticism. Celeste greeted each one with the same gentle attention, her hands moving with practiced precision as she assessed their wounds. Jackson watched in amazement as she worked. With some patience, she used conventional medical techniques, cleaning and bandaging physical injuries with skill that rivaled any field medic, but with others, her approach was entirely different. She would place her hands on their temples or over their hearts, humming in that strange, beautiful way that seemed to resonate with the very foundations of reality. One soldier, a young Valorian with severe burns across half his face, broke down sobbing as she worked on him. "The pain," he whispered, "it never stops." "I know," Celeste replied, her voice infinitely gentle, "but pain is not punishment, it is information. Your body is trying to tell you something important about healing." As she continued to work, the soldier's breathing gradually slowed. The burns didn't disappear, but the tension in his face eased, and for the first time since arriving, he seemed to find some measure of peace. "How do you do it?" Jackson asked when the last patient had been treated. "How do you carry so much pain without breaking?" Celeste was cleaning her hands in a basin of water that somehow sparkled with inner light. "I learned that healing others heals the healer. Every wound I tend teaches me something about my own trauma. Every person I help reminds me that connection is possible, that love is stronger than fear." She dried her hands and turned to face him. "But I am not immune to breaking, Jackson. There are nights when the weight of all I have witnessed threatens to crush me. There are moments when I question whether my wandering makes any difference at all. What keeps you going?" "Hope," she said simply, "and the knowledge that even in the darkest places, consciousness finds a way to reach toward light. You are proof of that, me. You could have reported me to your superiors. You could have classified me as a security threat or an enemy asset. Instead, you chose to see me as a being worthy of understanding. That choice matters more than you know." As they stood together in the makeshift healing station, surrounded by the evidence of suffering, but also of recovery. Jackson felt something fundamental shifting within him. He was beginning to understand that his attraction to Celeste went far beyond physical or even emotional connection. She represented a way of being in the universe that he had forgotten was possible. A reminder that existence could be about creation rather than destruction, healing rather than harm. "Teach me more," he said. "Tomorrow," she replied, but there was a promise in her voice that encompassed far more than just another day. "Tonight, rest. Let your consciousness integrate what it has learned." As she gathered her supplies and prepared to leave, Jackson caught her hand. "Celeste, yes. Thank you for seeing me, for helping me remember." She smiled, and in that smile was the warmth of 1,000 suns. "Thank you for being brave enough to be seen." And as she disappeared into the gathering dusk, Jackson knew that his life had been irrevocably changed. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was a man awakening to the possibility of love in its purest form. Love that transcended species and circumstance to touch the very essence of what it meant to be alive. The crystalline gardens appeared overnight. Or perhaps they had always been there, waiting for someone with the vision to see them. Jackson found Celeste standing among formations of living crystal that sang in harmonious frequencies, their surfaces reflecting not just light, but somehow the very essence of hope itself. The structures grew from the earth like flowers, their translucent petals capturing and amplifying the morning sunlight until the entire space shimmered with rainbow brilliance. "This is impossible," Jackson breathed, running his fingers along a crystal formation that hummed with life. "Only if you believe." "Impossibility exists," Celeste replied, her voice carrying the same musical quality as the crystals themselves. "These gardens are memories made manifest, dreams given form. They grow wherever enough beings remember what peace feels like." She moved among the crystal formations like a dancer, her flowing robes catching the refracted light and scattering it in patterns that seemed to tell stories. The wounded bird that had become her constant companion perched on her shoulder, its feathers now showing an opalescent sheen that matched the garden's ethereal beauty. "The other soldiers are talking," Jackson said, settling beside a crystal pool where water flowed upward in defiance of gravity. "They say you're dangerous, that you're using some kind of alien technology to manipulate minds." Celeste laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "They are not wrong. I am dangerous to their carefully constructed walls of fear and separation. As for alien technology, is consciousness itself not the most alien force in the universe? The power to transform reality through focused intention, to heal wounds that seem permanent, to love across the boundaries of species and circumstance." She knelt beside the impossible fountain, cupping the upward flowing water in her hands. "But they are also afraid because they sense something awakening in you. Change in one person creates ripples that touch everyone around them. Your fellow soldiers see you becoming something they don't understand, and it challenges their own assumptions about what is possible." Jackson watched the water defy gravity, flowing from her hands back into the fountain in streams of liquid light. "What am I becoming?" "Yourself," she said simply. "The person you were before the world taught you to be afraid of your own capacity for love." Over the past weeks, Jackson had felt the change she described. His morning reports had become less detailed, his weapons maintenance more cursory. Instead of analyzing threats and tactical advantages, he found himself noticing the way sunlight caught on broken glass, the resilience of plants growing through concrete, the expressions of hope that flickered across the faces of refugees, despite their circumstances. "My commanding officer is asking questions," he said, "about my patrol routes, my contact with alien civilians, my psychological fitness for duty." Celeste stopped playing with the water and looked at him with those storm-colored eyes. "And what will you tell him? The truth, I suppose, that I've found something worth protecting that's bigger than any military objective, even if it means losing everything you've built your identity around." Jackson considered this. His military career had been his anchor, his source of purpose and belonging. But sitting here in a garden that shouldn't exist, watching water flow upward toward the sky, he realized that his old identity felt like a uniform that no longer fit. "I used to think that being a soldier meant being ready to die for something important," he said. "Now I think it means being ready to live for something important." Celeste moved closer, settling beside him on the crystal bench. "And what do you want to live for?" "This," he said, gesturing to the impossible garden around them. "The possibility that the universe is more beautiful and connected than we've been taught to believe. The chance that love might actually be stronger than fear. And you," he said, the word carrying the weight of everything he couldn't yet articulate. "I want to live for you, for us, for whatever we might become together." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that left brief trails of light. "I have wandered for so long, Jackson. I had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by another consciousness. Your people and mine, they look at me and see either a threat or a tool. But you see me as I am, eccentric and strange and utterly myself, because that's exactly who I fell in love with." The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge being built across an impossible chasm. Celeste's eyes widened, and for a moment the confident healer disappeared, replaced by someone vulnerable and uncertain. "Love," she repeated, testing the word like a new language. "Do you understand what you're saying? I am not human. I may never be able to return to my homeworld. I carry the trauma of 1,000 wounded souls, and I will never stop wandering toward the next place where healing is needed." "I know," Jackson said, reaching for her hand. "I love you because of those things, not despite them. I love your refusal to abandon anyone who is suffering. I love the way you see connections where others see divisions. I love that you make the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable." Their hands touched, and the crystal garden around them began to sing more loudly, as if their connection was amplifying the harmonic frequencies of the living stones. The upward flowing fountains sparkled more brightly, and new crystal formations began to emerge from the earth, growing toward the sky like prayers made manifest. "The garden is responding to us," Celeste whispered in wonder. "Or maybe we're responding to it," Jackson replied. "Maybe this is what happens when two beings stop hiding from their own capacity for connection." She leaned closer, her forehead touching his. "I have spent so long healing others that I forgot I might need healing myself. But when you look at me, I feel myself becoming whole. And when you look at me, I remember who I was before the war taught me to be afraid." They sat in silence for a long time, hands clasped, watching the crystal garden grow and change around them. Other beings began to appear, drawn by the harmonic frequencies and the sense of peace that radiated from the space. Refugees, soldiers, civilians, all manner of species came to walk among the singing crystals, their faces showing the same wonder and hope that Jackson felt in his own heart. "They come because they sense what we've created here," Celeste said, watching a group of children play in the rainbow light. "When two beings love each other completely, without reservation or condition. It creates a field of possibility that others can feel. It reminds them that they too are capable of such connection. Is that why you've been alone for so long? Because you were waiting for someone who could love you without trying to change you. Perhaps, she said, or perhaps I was waiting for someone who could show me that love is not about possession or control, but about witnessing and celebrating the truth of another being. As the day progressed, the crystal garden continued to grow, its boundaries expanding to encompass more and more of the ruined city. Wherever the crystals touched, life began to return. Plants grew more lush, water ran cleaner, and the very air seemed to shimmer with renewed vitality. "We're changing the world," Jackson said in amazement. "We're remembering what the world was always meant to be," Celeste corrected. "Before fear divided us, before we forgot that all consciousness is connected at the deepest level." That evening, as the twin moons rose over the crystalline landscape, Jackson's commanding officer arrived with a full security detail. The soldiers approached cautiously, their weapons drawn but their expressions uncertain. Even the most battle-hardened veterans seemed affected by the garden's peaceful energy. "Mitchell," the commander called out, "you're to return to base immediately for debriefing." Jackson stood slowly, his hands still clasped with Celeste's. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't do that. This is not a request, soldier. You've been compromised by alien influence. You need immediate psychological evaluation. I've never been more clear about anything in my life," Jackson replied calmly. "I'm not abandoning what we've built here." The commander's expression softened slightly as he looked around the impossible garden. "Son, I understand the attraction. But this thing, whatever it is, it's not natural. It's not human." "Neither is love," Celeste said, rising gracefully beside Jackson. "Neither is hope, or compassion, or the courage to choose connection over separation. These are forces that transcend species, that exist wherever consciousness recognizes itself." In another, the commander started to reply, but his words were interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze. From the crystalline formations around them came a new harmony, deeper and more complex than anything they had heard before. The crystals were singing not just with their own voices, but with the combined resonance of every being who had found peace within the garden. "Listen," Celeste said softly. "Do you hear it? The song of consciousness remembering itself. The sound of a universe where love is the fundamental force, not fear." One by one, the soldiers began to lower their weapons. The garden's influence was undeniable, its peace infectious. Even the commander seemed to struggle against the growing sense of wonder that filled the space. "This is what we could build," Jackson said, addressing not just his commander, but all the soldiers, all the beings who had gathered to witness what was happening. Not just here, but everywhere. A universe where difference is celebrated rather than feared, where healing is valued over harm, where love is recognized as the most powerful force in existence. "And if I refuse to allow it?" the commander asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then you'll be standing alone against the tide of evolution itself," Celeste replied with infinite gentleness. "But I don't believe you will, because deep down, you remember what it felt like to believe in something beautiful." The commander stood in silence for a long moment, his gaze moving from the impossible garden to the faces of his soldiers, all of whom seemed transformed by what they were witnessing. Finally, he holstered his weapon and removed his helmet. "I don't understand any of this," he said quietly, "but I can feel it. Whatever you've created here, it's real, it's good, And maybe it's exactly what this galaxy needs. As the security detail departed, leaving Jackson and Celeste alone in their crystal garden, the two lovers stood hand in hand beneath the star-filled sky. Around them, the living crystals continued their eternal song, their harmonies weaving together into something that sounded very much like hope. "What happens now?" Jackson asked. "Now we continue," Celeste replied. "We love each other, we tend to whoever needs healing, and we remember that every moment of connection creates ripples that touch the entire universe. We become living proof that love is not just possible between different species, but that it might be the very force that will heal the divisions that have torn our galaxy apart. And if the world tries to stop us, then we'll love it anyway," she said, her smile radiant in the crystal light. "Because that's what love does. It transforms everything it touches, including the things that resist it most." As they kissed beneath the singing crystals, the garden around them pulsed with renewed life. Their love had become a beacon, a reminder that in a universe often ruled by fear and division, two beings had chosen to see past their differences to the consciousness that connected them all. And in that choice, they had discovered not just love, but the very essence of what it meant to be alive.